Okay, this is Jim McCotter Live. I'm Jim McCotter, and Mondays on the Christian Nation, Tuesdays on church, Wednesdays on marriage, Fridays on your questions. Today is my life. And we're picking up where we left off last week. As you know, we started a lot of churches after I left Pueblo. God gave me that verse that if you're faithful with a little, I'll give you authority over 10 cities. And that was the blitz. We went in and basically saw 5 different churches start that summer in about 2 or 3 months in New Mexico, in Arizona, in Texas. And we left different students with us at these different campuses where they saw students saved for follow-up and to build the church. And of course, we went back off and on over the years. But Dennis and Mike and Jan and Thelma and my wife Barbara, we were all single then. Anyhow, there was about half a dozen of us on our little singing team, basically like an apostolic team. We would go into new places and go on the campus. And we went into Wyoming, saw that happen. Then we went to Kansas, and where we're at in Kansas City, a new work got started there. And in fact, it's interesting, in Kansas City, the scientific creationism, the creation research group, got the exact title of them. Anyhow, they got started as a result of our work in Kansas City because we went in and held a debate between creationism and an evolutionist there at Kansas City, Missouri, in Kansas City. And that was the beginning of the formation of the creation group, Morris and his group, as a result of our church having that debate with Henry Morris and an evolutionist. And they went on, and God has continued to use them mightily. So that whole ministry started. We were the catalyst for that, and thank the Lord for that. But anyhow, when we were in Kansas City, seeing the work raise up there, and meeting new saints, and some that my wife had known earlier. One of them was actually ended up being Mike Cater's wife, Susan, a great gal. But anyhow, she joined our little singing team. And so my wife had graduated from KU, which was in Lawrence, Kansas, only, I don't know, maybe an hour from Kansas City, and said, we need to go there and get the gospel out and reach her alumnus. So long story short, we said, okay, and we got in the car, and we kind of cased the place there at KU. And what we did, there was big dorms there, and so we went into our little singing group. Again, there was about 8 of us, I guess, at that point, as our kind of like a little apostolic team moving around. And we went to the dorm, and we went to the top floor. And what I suggested is, let's just holler out on the different floors, as they do a lot of times if they have a keg or a party. Some guy will say, hey, there's a party downstairs, and this sort of thing. And so we were, so that's kind of, we followed that flow, that model, and went to the top floor of the first dormitory. And I hollered down the hall. It was about 10 stories, I guess. Hey, there's a singing group from Colorado down in the lobby. Come on down. See you there. People started to shout, what's going on? Where are they from? What's their name? And I would just jump back into the elevator. I knew that's all I needed to say. Push the button and go to the 9th floor, the next floor. The elevator would open. I'd step out. Hey, there's a singing group downstairs in the lobby. Come on down. And people would start hollering it out all over the guys down the halls. And I'd step back in the elevator, go to the next floor, and literally went 8th, 7th, 6th, said the same thing every floor. Hey, there's a singing group downstairs. And sometimes just say all that I need to say. And students looking for things to do. Anyhow, we had the guitar and banjo, and my little gut bucket. I played a wash tub, big wash tub, tip it upside down, put a hole in the center of it, and put a clothesline through, and stick a big washer underneath to hold the clothesline, and then put a broomstick on the side, stick a notch on the broomstick, and hold it up and put the cord at the top of that, and then you could pull that, put your foot on the drum, on the tub, on the side of the tub, so it wouldn't lift the tub up, and one foot on the side of the tub, of course, with the other one on the floor, and then a handle on the top of the broomstick. And as I pulled it, you could have the note like a single string on a bass, and it really works pretty good. And that was kind of cool. Students like that, and so we'd play folk music. But anyhow, we had my wash tub was down there, and the guitar and the banjos, they were all down there. None of us were there because we were going on the different floors. The girls were doing it on the girls' floors, and us guys were doing it on the guys' floors. And so by the time we got down to the bottom floor, there was already 100 or more students crowded around our musical instruments there, and more continued to pour down as we went through the crowd, get up in the front, and we'd start playing the banjo and the guitar, and basically folk musics, and kind of just give teaser things a little bit about a changed life and on different things. We kind of had it set up. So we kind of basically had a little program that we designed for the lost. And so we'd sing 30, 40 minutes. I mean, it was a whole show. And by different ones kind of sharing a little bit between the programs, they just got to know you just like any singing group would. And so there began to be a rapport. And of course, my playing on the gut bucket was kind of a novel thing. And so I would build a rapport with the students, having fun, smiling, laughing, singing the songs and what have you. Some of them they'd know, some of them we actually created and wrote. Dennis, Mike, I'm not sure who all wrote them. I know Dennis, I did some. I think Mike did too. But anyhow, so this was pretty cool, and the students were into it, and they began to see, they could just see that we were different, just, the spirit. When you're full of the spirit, it's just evident. But they knew we loved them, and that there something was neat, and there was an attraction, an appeal that was already there before we really mentioned Jesus. And I'd been in Vietnam before this, and this was in the Vietnam War era, closer to the end of it, but there was a lot of activity related to this, and that was a real hot issue, one of the hottest topics really on the campus. And so having been in the war actually in Vietnam gave me an interesting entree. And Dennis usually wore his fatigue pants anyhow. He kind of looked like he was a soldier, even though he was never in Vietnam, but that's another story. Anyhow, so I mean, we just kind of looked cool like the other students, and we were basically student age anyhow. And so different ones would kind of share between songs, sometimes just introducing the song or saying something, etc. Then towards the end of it, I shared, and they probably thought I was going to introduce a song or say something, and I just kind of said some things and kept saying things and kept talking, and virtually talked for about an hour. But I would get into my testimony, really my testimony. How I'd been in Vietnam and could talk, really make what turned to be fun again to be really serious, because I talked about guys' lives who died. A Christian who said to his men that I know Christ. If I die, I'm going to heaven. Where are you going? And how he was mocked until one night a grenade came into the foxhole. He threw himself over it. He literally gave his life and sacrificed it for the other men. And in the process, I mean, people were really moved as I shared these different stories and shared about my own life and how I was literally facing death, potential death every day, and how Jesus had changed my life. And again, the Holy Spirit, I can't say this right now. I'm sure my personal testimony to you is mostly believers. Some of you might not know Christ, but if you don't, you need to know him, because he changes a life. And I felt so safe in Vietnam. I just, when I couldn't, as you heard my earlier testimony, when I couldn't kill myself, I wasn't trying to commit suicide, but I was trying to pursue something that ended up, I would have died had I been successful at it. And more than once, God, actually about 4 times, I should have been dead. But I knew I was indestructible, even to this moment. I'm indestructible until God's time. He says he's numbered my days. Don't worry about it, it says. Tomorrow will take care of the things of itself. So anyhow, in that dorm here with 100, 200 students or more that would pack in this lobby, I would get right into the gospel. And so they began to understand, and they wouldn't even, and we'd all be standing up there, and the rest would be focused on me. And of course, the whole crowd would be, all the students would be. And I would go into the gospel and tell them how they can know right now, more than I'm standing here, they can know they're going to heaven for sure, without a doubt. And the peace and the joy and the purpose and the meaning that gives in life now. And being a genuine Christian, knowing Christ genuinely, not church, not religion. I'd say you can go to church until they think you're the janitor and you'll still go to hell. You can take communion until you're drunk and it won't help you get to heaven. You can get baptized until you're waterlogged and it won't help. No good work. It's faith, because he loves us. If you had to be an intellectual, then people that didn't have as high IQ would make it. If you had to work for it, an invalid might not make it. It's free to everybody who believes. That's what love is. God so loved the world, he just gave his son, so that all we needed to do was believe in him, receive him, accept him. And the power of God would speak through his word. His word is living and powerful. And at the end, I had my little pocket New Testament. Sometimes I knew the verse by memory, but I would read it, or virtually there, the gospel verses, and have them see that this is right in the Bible. And of course, most of them had never really understood this or ever seen this, even if they'd gone to some church. Long story short, after about an hour, I would say, look, if you want to know for sure, I want you to come up here right now. We were pretty full and pretty crowded already, and there wasn't a lot of room up in the front where we were. But I'd say, you just come on up right now. I'm going to show you right from the Bible how you can know for sure right now that you can have eternal life. And at that time, we'd close off. And at that time, a lot would meander off. But a good number would come up, 10, 20, sometimes 30 or more students would come up. And there'd be the 8 or so of us. And then I would be there, and I'd just say, sit down. I want everybody to sit down. They'd sit on the floor there. And I would just then very simply go through the gospel again, very briefly, because I've been sharing it before, but go through it again and say, you can receive Christ right now. As many as receive him, to them he gives the right to become the children of God, which is in essence believing in his name, believing who he is and what he did. If you will call in the name of the Lord, reading the verse right there, if you will call in the name of the Lord, you'll be saved. And believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. And if you want to call, I want you to pray right here, right now. Call on him. Tell him you believe in him and you want to be saved. And we would pray. And oftentimes I would pray. I said, if this is your heart, and you want to express this to the Lord, you pray it. It's your own heart with the Lord. And I would pray. And they would pray with me. And it wasn't uncommon to see 10, 20, sometimes 30 students get saved right there at the floor. And of course, there was 8 or 10 of us. And so then we would, the different girls would get with the girls, and the different guys would get with the guys. And oftentimes we'd have, each one of us would have 2 or 3 or 4 guys around us that had just gotten saved, and we'd interact with them more and develop even a relationship with them. And then be with them for another 1, 2, 3 hours. So we'd usually get started around 7 o'clock at night. We'd sing for an hour. It'd be 8. I'd preach for another hour. It'd be 9, 9:30. Follow up for another hour, 10, 10:30. And then we'd talk and even get closer. And oftentimes we were there until midnight. It was pretty common. We'd be with some right up until midnight. And of course, sometimes we'd meet some new Christians that way as well. And so we began to form a group right then and there, and a bond with those that had just gotten saved, and just put our arms around them and love them. And with our group of 8 or 10 and maybe 20 or so of them, we had a little group of about 30. And so what we'd tell them is, we're going to be here again tomorrow night, and we're going to go into the next dorm over. We want you to join us and be there with us. We're going to sing and share again. And of course, they wanted to be with us too, because they had just gotten saved. And so I remember that night driving back, it was about 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning by the time we got back to Kansas City, where we were staying. And we were all excited. That was our first night at Kansas University in Lawrence, Kansas. Neil Graber, Goering, and oh my goodness, I can't think of all the different brothers' names that came to know the Lord there, but a lot of neat brothers. Bill Woods, I think he got saved there at that time. Anyhow, just a lot of guys, a lot of gals that came to know Christ. Anyhow, the next night we came down there, drove back down, went into the other big dorm complex, went to the top floor. Hey, there's a singing group from Colorado. Come on down. Go to the next one. Hey, a singing group from Colorado. Just keep going, floor after floor after floor. Get down there, and there'd already be a crowd starting to mill around where our instruments were. We'd get down and we'd sing for an hour. I'd preach for an hour. Then we'd have follow up for an hour, and then we'd get close, even individually with ones, until about midnight, and drove home the next night. That was Tuesday night. And of course, the ones that got saved the night before, a lot of them came over and were with us that night too. So we were beginning to build this relationship. And then the next night we said, hey, we're going to be in this other dorm on Wednesday night, the next night. And so we went back home and get home about 1 or 2 in the morning, get up and just have time with the Lord and do whatever we needed to do during the day, then drive back down to Lawrence that next night. Went to the next dorm. Hey, there's a singing group downstairs. Went through the same thing that night, Wednesday night. People came over from that had gotten saved. New ones got saved. And basically, we did that for about 2 weeks. And we saw a neat bunch of Christians. And we were with them that fall and began to build up basically a fellowship at that point there. We'd seen things start going, and Christians in Kansas City had caught the vision. We shared, hey, meet right here in your home, build up. House churches is, you don't need to spend your money, time, or thought thinking you're a church because you meet in a big building. There's 20 of you or 30, however many there were that we'd seen raise up in Kansas City, and we were there building with them. Some of them came over with us to Lawrence, and the towns were pretty close to each other, so there was a mutual going back and forth, encouraging one another, sharing one another. We went over to Lawrence. We didn't have any place to stay there. There was, like I said, about 10 of us now in our little apostolic team. But God did a miracle. There was a Greek house that had been abandoned, or no one was staying in it. Long story short, I think if we cleaned it up or something, we could stay in it. Again, had our sleeping bags, sleep on the floor, and girls were on one floor, the guys were on the other. And so we took over this frat house on the campus and continued to build that fall with the believers there at Lawrence. Lawrence was kind of interesting too when we went there. We didn't realize this, but again, this was at the height of the Vietnam War, and radicals, basically Marxists, communists, were taking over a lot of campuses. They had burned the entire student union down at KU, and the people around the campus, the residents, were fearful of their own residences and the radicals burning their houses down. And they had a campaign to put lights on all their front porches, and all the people in the neighborhood around the campus would have all their lights, their outdoor lights on all night to give protection from these radicals. In front of Strong Hall, which was one of the main places that the radicals would have their big rallies. It was kind of a central place. Well, this is where I thought we should go. So when it was about noon every day, I would go, and our little team would go, and it was outside, so it was pretty hard to hear the music. As I recall, I'm not even sure we played the music there. I think I just got up on the steps and started speaking, declaring Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and he's the answer to life. And would preach for about an hour, and a lot of students would come around, and this is where radicals would come around, and it was kind of like, what, even some of the radicals were, what is going on? This is our turf. This is our territory, where we have our hate rallies, our anti-war rallies, anti-establishment rallies. Well, we were standing up there, and God just brought in students as I was sharing the gospel, sharing my testimony, sharing the word, preaching away for an hour, and pulling people up, students up, to get saved. And of course, ones that had gotten saved in the dorms, because we had reached all the dorms, they came out. So we had a pretty good core now of Christians, our little apostolic team, plus all those that had gotten saved. And they would come every day at noon there and hear the gospel, bring people in, and it would help build the crowd. And those that would get saved, we'd pull them up in front and say, and lead them to Christ right there. And then what I started at that point in time was every day. We were there every day. We changed the atmosphere of the campus. There was never, to my knowledge, there was never another radical protest in front of Strong's Hall when I was there, when we were there. I never remember one anyhow. And prior to that, we understood that's what was always going on. So even though the student union had been burned down and there had been a lot of fear, the peace of God was impacting, and probably more than we realized. We probably were not even conscious of the ripple effects. All I know is we were just fearlessly preaching the word of God. People would get saved, and then after kind of our gospel rally, I'd have everybody sit down on the lawn, and I remember we had the New American Standard had just come out. They didn't even have the whole Bible. I think they just had the New Testament. And I was really glad for that because it related more. It was a good translation, and it was more, didn't use thee and thou, and so it was more contemporary language for students, especially. This was important. And so I remember I had my New American Standard Bible, and that's what we got for all the other students that got saved. And I told them at the end of our gospel rally, those that got saved, those that had gotten saved, they come in. I said, I want all of you to sit down on the lawn. We all sat down, and we started going through the book of 1 Corinthians. And I'd have a Bible study right out there, primarily with the direction with Christians, even though a lot of times non-Christians would be curious and come in on it. And of course, we would, different ones of the brothers or sisters would kind of attach to them and oftentimes lead them to the Lord. And so we'd have a Bible study right there. And that's when I really started, for the first time, having a daily Bible study, thinking of the Apostle Paul when he went to the school of Tarsus, and every day he reasoned with them out of the scriptures why Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ. And every day I was reasoning there in the center of the campus. And the other brothers and sisters, we were all working together as a team. They were much younger in the Lord for the most part. So I did most of the speaking at that, especially at that point in time. As they grew up and became more mature in the Lord, they shared with me a lot and became, in many ways, more than me. Just God has used them wonderfully on in life. But be that as it may, I never will forget going through 1 Corinthians. Corinthians is so good. It's probably one of the more important books that I like to go through with people, because the church at Corinth had said they were so carnal, and so much of the church today is so carnal, and that book really is so good for meeting our needs today. So as I went through that, every day we had to study. People would come in, and we would preach the gospel there, and then we would have this Bible study, and of course we would do things throughout the day. People would go out and witness on their own. We'd always meet for dinner every night. All the Christians that had gotten saved would come in, they'd eat with us. The girls would prepare the food in the Greek house. I can't remember exactly when we got that Greek house, but so we were just with the believers 24/7 virtually. And right there in front of Strong's Hall, down the lawn area, you'd look down a ways, and there was a pond. I can't remember, it was Potter's Pond or Lake Laverne. I get them mixed up between Iowa State and KU. But anyhow, there was a pond down there, and all these new ones had not been baptized. So we went through the scripture on baptism, and we took them down to the pond and baptized them right there on the campus. And so they really realized they were dying to self. Everyone would know, of course, even being publicly out there with us, they were identified as being a Christian for sure. So we would baptize them down that little pond. And when people would get saved, continue to get saved, the Christians, we'd take them. And of course, I didn't just do the baptizing. In fact, I always encourage those that led them to the Lord to baptize them. That's one of the uniqueness about the New Testament. They didn't have a leadership structure, anything like the traditional church. Everyone could obey the scriptures fully. And so, in fact, even Jesus said he didn't baptize all those that were coming to him, but it says his disciples baptized him. And then even Paul followed the same example in Corinth. He said he only baptized 2 or 3 that he could remember, and yet there was thousands of people that got saved in Corinth. God told Paul, I have many people here. That word many there implied thousands. And so, you know, he had others would get saved and they would baptize them and they would carry out, because God was raising up leaders. Leaders is the revolutionary distinction between the traditional Christianity today versus New Testament Christianity. And so they were excited when they get saved and see others saved, that these young Christians could baptize their new converts in Christ. And so anyhow, so we stayed there right up until Christmas. And the Christmas break, the Christians were going to go be with their families and when school was out and what have you, and we encouraged that. But at KU, they didn't come back to school until about a month later, latter part of January, and they were going to be gone so long. We thought it would be, this gives us a great opportunity to be together and not to wait and be apart for over a month. So what we said is, after you go home and you're with your family for Christmas and New Year's, then after the first, the second or third, we'll see if we could find a university that was close to KU that opened earlier. Some we thought would open right after the first of the year. Maybe I think a third was about that Monday. And we looked around, and Iowa State University was one of those that was just north of Kansas and not too far away. Again, we've kind of believed in the principle of not overextending, as Paul said in Corinthians. He said, I didn't overextend when I came to you, because he was expanding out. There was a support, just like in a military battle. If soldiers get too far out, that you can't give the support you need back and forth. Anyhow, Iowa State was the next fairly close major university, and had a big dorm population, and they came back into school, I think, around the second or third, I think probably the 3rd of January. So that meant the students from KU could get with us and before KU got started, and have about 2 weeks together evangelizing. So our goal was really not so much to start a church or anything about the future of Iowa State University. It was really to get with all those Christians that had gotten saved, the new fellowship in Kansas City now, and the fellowship especially in Lawrence with all those the new students, young Christians, to be with them and to train them, to disciple them, to build them up, and of course to evangelize with them. They can be with us. We were training them, and they were very, very evangelistic and had a heart for the Lord. So long story short, we said, hey, we're going to meet at Iowa State on the, I think it was about the 3rd, and everybody come there. We'll meet there. Of course, we had never been there. I'd never been there in my life. Didn't have any way of knowing where we'd stay, what we'd eat. Again, didn't have anything planned, but just knew where it was on the map, knew they came back, knew we wanted to be there with all the new believers and labor in the gospel. So everyone's excited about that. Yeah, go home for Christmas, love your family, share the gospel with people, tell them how your life has changed. And we'll see you on the 3rd in Ames, Iowa, where Iowa State was. And so sure enough, on the 3rd, lots of details, but God provided a place for all of us to stay. We had, I don't know, maybe, I can't remember the exact number, maybe 40, 50 of us that ended up being up there. And again, we didn't have much money I don't even know how we got money to speak of, but somehow we were able to get food. We scavenged a lot. A lot of times grocery stores or different places would throw good food away, and we sometimes got food that way. And the girls would cook it up for all of us. And there was a little church that was a real small little church that said they'd love to let us use that. So we used their kitchen, and it was near the campus. And I think some of the guys maybe slept downstairs there, and maybe the girls upstairs. I don't remember all the details of that. But we went to Iowa State and began to share the gospel. And of course, it was a small little army. We were all over the campus. And again, we were going into the dorms and hollering at through all the dorm music group at the bottom, and people would come down and we'd play our folk song and what have you. And then I'd preach for an hour, and we'd see a lot of students come to know Christ. We did that in the dorms. We did it in the Greek houses, fraternity houses. We did it individually on the campus, where just we'd sit down with students, and everyone was sharing the gospel and with other students. Long story short, we were there for 2 weeks, and it was a real train. Again, our primary goal was the training of all these new Christians from KU. So our thought, I think, originally was we would just go up there for 2 weeks, then go back and keep building the new church in Kansas City, and especially KU. But after the second week, before everyone went back, we met. We had always meet every Sunday and remember the Lord, break bread, pass the cup to remember the bread, to remember his sacrificed body, and the cup to remember his blood for our covenant, new covenant, and eat a fellowship meal together and share the word. This was just a regular practice every Sunday, along with many ways doing that sort of thing we eat every day together. But that Sunday, we invited everybody in to the Memorial Union. I don't know if we started a student group yet or not, but somehow we were able to get a room, kind of a large room where they, I think, maybe had dances or something in there at times. But anyhow, we got this room. And as it turned out, after 2 weeks, we had 150 students that were there, and some faculty, even 1 or 2 faculty. And we had this, we were in this room with 150 of us, and I thought, wow, this is really exciting. I spent the first church I started, it took a year to get about a dozen, and another year to get another dozen. Second church down in Pueblo, it took a year to get about, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 of us, almost twice as many in a year. And then it would take, on the blitz, with our large group, we'd be in places for 2 weeks, and we might see 30, 20, 30, 40, maybe at the most 50 raised up. But now, in 2 weeks, we saw 150. So God was building in me, which had a real factor, but building in others, and we were seeing in the same amount of time so much more happen, which was kind of interesting to see over the years, really. Well, I was excited. 2 weeks, we had 150 students there, and it was incredible. Most of them were brand new Christians and excited about the Lord, and they didn't even know what we were going to do, but they were glad to be there. And what we'd sing some, and then we'd have a time when we'd remember the Lord, and we'd tell them, about taking the bread and the cup, and say, anybody, you can all thank the Lord. Unlike a traditional church, just one pastor or somebody gets thanks. We said everybody can thank the Lord here, and so I remember. I can't remember exactly how it started, but all of a sudden I shut my eyes, looked down, and it was like it was thunder. Everybody started praying at the same time, or a lot did. I don't know if it was everybody, but I'm sure not 1 or 2, 2 or 3 dozen. A lot of them. Everybody was praying out loud. It was kind of confused. I opened my eyes. I thought, my goodness, they didn't know what to do. Most of them had never been in even a church before. It's the first time they were saved, first time with a Christian group, and some were standing up, and it was they didn't know what to do. I just said everybody can pray, and so everybody was praying. And so I stood up on the chair so I could get everybody and tell them to quiet down, and while they were supposedly praying, and they were, but it was confusion, just like Paul said in Corinthians, that do things decent and in order. God is not the author of confusion when the gathering comes together. And I quoted that verse, shared that verse. And also in 1 Corinthians 14, it says you can all share, but one at a time. You take turns. And I shared the verses in Corinthians. I realized, hey, I needed to give a little order, a little direction. And so I said, whoever's praying, you pray. Maybe you should stand if you want. You don't have to. But if you're standing and praying, again, it was a pretty big group, about 150 of us. I said, well, you're standing and praying. If the next person that wants to pray, when they stop praying, why don't you stand up? And then when that person stops praying, we'll know you're going to, then you can pray next. Because all of them wanted to pray. And so that's so the first person that prayed, he was praying. And I looked around, and even though it was quiet now, when you could hear this brother praying, it was so funny. 10, 20 people all stood up, and they were all looking at each other. Who's going to sit down? And finally one sat down, then another sat down, and then there was only, and now this is all going on while this brother's praying. Finally, there was one guy that stayed the longest, and he remained standing while this guy prayed. As soon as he stopped praying, then this guy started praying. And as soon as he started praying, a bunch of people all stood up again, and then they slowly, different ones sat down until there was one other person standing. And I just thought, I don't know what to say. Some Christians have never seen that or ever heard. I hadn't before. And but part of it relates to being taught. I shared, look, God's not interested in your long prayers. Just pray real short so others can pray. Thank Jesus. Learn how to teach us to pray, his disciples asked him. And so sometimes we need to teach people how to pray. And how exciting it is when there's new believers. And if they go into the traditional church, they immediately get fit into a form that is so straitjacket. And so many prayer meetings, it's incredible. It's so quiet and somber, and sometimes there's long space time between prayer. And I thought, my goodness, if Jesus is here. When Jesus was here on earth, people were clamoring to get with him. But we've learned this tradition. We learn things through example that's not always good. And here was a group that hadn't, been in the traditional church. And the model they showed, they all wanted to talk to Jesus and tell him how they appreciated getting saved last week or leading somebody else to the Lord. And long story short. Anyhow, that was quite a remembrance of the Lord that night. And after that was over, we baptized another 32 new converts. We went over to the swimming pool in the school. I remember one of them was I think about the only older person we had with us, and she had not been baptized. And I just remember how exciting it was, even for all of us. This one person that was a lady, I think she was in her 50s, and had come to know the Lord and had not baptized, been baptized. We baptized her as well as 32 other students that one night. I remember one time too. So anyhow, long story short, at the end of the 2 weeks, the KU students, they had to go back to school. We said, yeah, go back. And we didn't know what to do, but we thought, there was 50 of them. We saw 150 here. We didn't feel we could just desert this new group here at Iowa State, where we saw 2 or 3 times as much happen in about half the time as we saw at Lawrence. So we said, hey, we love you guys. We're close. We'll come back and forth. You guys, you've got the Holy Spirit. You've got the Bible. We've met with you for a couple of months. You know how to carry on. And carry on they did. Faithfully went back, and they witnessed every day. They fellowshiped together, and Sundays they remembered the Lord and prayed and all got together for hours usually, and continued to see men and women saved. And we stayed on at Iowa State University. I think we might have gone back that spring and visit them at least one time to encourage and help guide. But I and our little apostolic team, basically, we stayed on and following up those at Iowa State. And at this point in time, we were seeing a lot happen, not especially at Iowa State, because I stayed there. We didn't keep going to new places at that point. Eventually did, but we anchored down. And I'm going to, next Thursday, I'm going to share what happened at Iowa State, because we stayed there, and I stayed there the longest of any place up until then. And we saw unbelievable things happen there. And it became a model in many ways for great things that God did even in other places. So I'm going to close off today, having just moved into Iowa State, seeing 150 days up in 2 weeks, baptized 32 on the first night, and continuing to get the gospel out. The group went back to KU, and we'll tell you how we continue to follow up not only KU and Kansas City, but in 2 works in Texas, 2 works in New Mexico, a work in Arizona, works in Colorado. We usually call them works, because when you say church, people have such a preconceived, they have an American tradition idea of church, and it's not like anything like it was in the New Testament. So if you say work, you say, what is that like? Well, it's like the Bible. Oh, really? Follow the Bible. Anyhow, this is just sharing the grace, the favor, the mercy, the kindness of one little life. And many that God saved, went on, have done far more than I did and have done and in doing. But just thank the Lord that I've got a testimony and you've got a testimony. Share your testimony and follow Jesus so he can do even greater and mightier things you know nothing about. If you're alive, he's got a lot for you. Love him. See you tomorrow with your questions. God bless you.
You live to die, rejected.